Good evening. Hope you're doing well. Today we are going to be catching up tonight and learning Maseches Chullin Daf Pei Zayin, and as well much of Pei Ches. We're at the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, about 8 lines or so from the bottom of the page at the 2 dots, 2 lines before the wide line. Our Mishnah at the top of this page spoke about the following case, kisahu v'niskala, that if it had been covered, if kisui hadam had been done, and then it got uncovered. So what did our Mishnah say? Oh, power's out. What did our Mishnah say? That kisahu v'niskala. So what does our Mishnah say? Kisahu v'niskala pater milachasos. You do not have to cover again. Okay, so let's take a look at this from the Gemara's perspective. Amar le Ravacha berei de Rava le Ravashi. Ma'ishno me'ashava saveda. Yeah, thank you very much. Obviously, you're going to be chayav to do kisui hadam again. It's no different than ashava saveda. So says the Gemara, what do we know about ashava saveda? The Omar Mar, we learned in a brisa many years ago in Bava Metzia. The Omar Mar hashev afilu mea pe'amin. That the mitzvah of Ashava Saveda really doesn't have an upper limit in regards to the number of times that we are, this is getting more difficult by the minute, Gerald. Hold on, I got to turn on my, flashlight here. We are kind of getting out of, okay. So says the Gemara that, we know from Hashava Saveda that is the case, that we have to do Hashava Saveda many times. So why are you surprised if Kisui Adam, if the process of Kisui Adam falls apart? Of course, that's the case. Obviously, we're going to be in a scenario where we have to repeat Kisui Adam many times. Says the Gemara, no, that's not true. Amar le hasam lo ksiv miuta. Over there is no miut. So says the Gemara, but hacha ksiv miuta. Therefore, v'chisahu. Therefore, if it becomes uncovered, then, as our Mishnah points out, that kisahu v'niskala, we said that it is going to be pater. So that's the difference between the two worlds of Hashava Saveda and kisui hadam. Says the Gemara, kiso ruach. What if the wind covers it? Meaning a human being wasn't involved in the process of covering it. So then let's see how that plays out. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana Amar Rav Yochanan. He teaches Lo shanu ela shechazar v'niskala. When is it that we say that kisahu haruach, that if the wind covered it, then you'd be chayiv lechasos, the final din in the Mishnah at the top of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph? That's only true if it became revealed again. Aval lo chazar v'niskala pater milachasos. If the wind covered it and it stayed covered, you're good to go. The blood is still covered, you're good. Chazar v'niskala my have. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Even if it gets uncovered, what is the big deal? After all, you already performed the mitzvah. Again, it reminds me of that mitzvah of lighting candles, of kavsa ein zakukla. That if we have something that was already done, why do I have to do it again? It's covered. So, okay, so we're done. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Papa says, Zosameres ein dichui etzel mitzvos. That you can't really have a dichui by this particular mitzvah. Okay, why does it apply over here and not by candles? Hilchos Shabbos, Shilas. Okay, fine. We're not going to discuss this now. But ein dichui, eitzel mitzvos is the Gemara's principle. Rashi, ein dichui, about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. Ein dibur maskal ein dichui. Ein omrim dichui eitzel mitzvos. V'chiamrinan dichui b'psul korban hu de'amrinan. Only with other scenarios of psul korban. Not going to get into that right now, but that is what the Gemara says. Wait 1 second. If you're saying that it becomes uncovered, that if you're saying that if it was covered already, that you don't have to do it again, like our Mishnah says, hold on 1 second. If there's blood that absorbs into the ground, one is obligated, in fact, to do kisui hadam. So to this, the Gemara responds, Hasam sherishumo nikr. That's only where the imprint of the blood in the ground is still visible. You're right that it absorbed into the dirt, but if it's still visible that there's a lot of red, there's a lot of blood there, then one would be obligated to do kisui adam. The Gemara says at the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, at a new Mishnah. Remember, we're talking about the mitzvah of kisui adam. Let's say there's dam shenis arev b'mayim. Let's say there's blood and the blood gets mixed with water. So bo maris dam, if the water looks like blood, so in other words, it's red, chayav l'chasos, then you still have a mitzvah to do kisui adam. If nisare beyayin, let's say that the blood falls into wine, that's more complicated because the wine is already that color. So if the wine is already red and you're adding in blood, now it gets very difficult to tell what's what. We know when you add blood to water that it's going to have a new redness, and therefore we can determine already, but based on the color, we can determine whether or not you're chayav l'chasos. But what if the liquid you're putting it into is not regular water? It's already red because it's wine. So here the Gemara says, Roan oso ki ilu humayim. We project that if the volume of blood that would have been added to water is sufficient, then then we let me just go back a second. That nisar beyayin ron oso ki'ilu humayim. We view it as water. If with water that amount of blood would have made it red chayav l'chasos, and if not, not. What if it's nisare b'dam behema? Dam behema is not chayav in kisui adam. So what if it's nisare b'dam behema? So there, sorry, just readjusting here to get the lighting right. If it's nisare b'dam behema, o b'dam chaya, or if it's mixed up with dam chaya, roan oso ki'ilu hein mayim, a similar measure if it were to have been with water. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, ein dam mevatel dam. We don't ever view blood as water in this regard. We simply assume that ein dam mevatel dam, and because ein dam mevatel dam, so therefore you'll be obligated in kisui adam no matter what. That's Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. We'll dig into this a little bit more in the Gemara. What about dam hanitas? What about blood that sprinkles? Or v'she'al hasakin. Let's say that there's blood that's on the blade where the shchita took place. Chayav l'chasos. You're obligated to do kisui adam. That's a pretty strict shita. That means that every little spot of blood, every little droplet of blood is going to be obligated in kisui adam. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Masai. When is it true that if there's blood that has sprinkled somewhere far away, or if there's blood that's on the blade that you're chayav l'chasos? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Masai bisman she'ein sham dam elahu. That's only true if there's blood. If the only blood that's left is the blood that's sprinkled or the blood that's on the knife. Aval yesham dam shelohu. But if there's other bloods, then pater milachasos. So that's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, that not every droplet of blood needs to be covered. Just droplets of blood that isn't just the initial has to be covered. But if the initial blood was covered, then you don't have to worry about the fact that there's some on the blade. No problem at all. The Gemara opens Pei Zayin Amid Beis about 7 lines down. Tnan Hasam. We have a Mishnah from Zvachim. It sounds very similar to ours, except that Mishnah is not talking about Zrikas. That Mishnah is not talking about Kisui Hadam, but rather Zrikas Hadam. This we learned early on, maybe not so early on in Maseches Zvachim, and again in Maseches Menachos. Tnan Hasam. We have a Mishnah from Maseches Zvachim, and here we're talking again not about Kisui Hadam, but rather Zrikas Hadam. Dam shenis arib b'mayim. Im yesh bo maris dam kosher. It still is eligible for zrikas hadam if the water has blood added to it and it looks like blood. So then you take that liquid and you're allowed to do zrikas hadam. Nis'arib b'yayin, if the blood gets mixed with wine and it's harder to tell how much blood there is. Ro'en oso ki'ilu humayim. We make an assessment that if the blood would have been added to wine, but had that wine been water, it would have been red. Then you would have been chayiv to do zrikas hadam, but otherwise, no dice. Nis'arib bedam behema o bedam chaya ro'en oso ki'ilu humayim. If it mixes with other bloods, we just assess based on whether or not had that blood been added to water, even though we added it to blood, but we theorize it had it been added to water, then we make our assessments that way. And here, just like our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein dam mevatel dam. Nope, you're not allowed to do that. Blood is not able to be nullified against other bloods. Omar Reb Chia bar Abba, Omar Reb Yochanan. Sorry, just some technical issues here. that's set. And let's just... There we go. And back to our camera here. Sorry for the slight delay, just some tech issues, being that we don't have some good Wi-Fi here. So it says the Gemara, Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Reb Yochanan, Lo shanu ella shenaflu mayim l'soch dam. When we talk about a blood-water mixture, the only time we allow, the way I framed it, the way it was written is actually not that way. The only time we allow for blood and water to be considered as blood is if mayim fell into dam, if the water goes into the blood. But if it's reversed, aval nafal dam l'soch mayim, but if it's not that way, if blood goes into water, rishon batel, every piece of blood, every droplet of blood that falls into water becomes like the water, and therefore you'll never have a scenario of water as the base and dam being added that you would be chayiv in zrikas hadam. Amar Rav Papa ule'inyan kisui eno kain. It's not the same with kisui adam. So let me say this out clearly. In the world of zrikas hadam, we have a rule that if the base is water and blood is added to it, it'll never be eligible for zrikas hadam. But that's not the rule by kisui adam. By kisui adam, one would be obligated in kisui adam, even if blood was added to water. Why? Because ein dichui eitzel mitzvos. Because we don't have a postponement of or a shutting down of mitzvos. Next, about a third of the way down, a little bit more, about halfway down on Pei Zayin Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Kol mare admimus, anything that looks red, mechapren, you're able to do kapara, which means zrikas hadam, umachshirin, and that blood, the blood-water combo, if it looks red, it can be machshir. It's one of the 7 liquids that can transfer tuma. And v'chayavin b'kisui. So says the Gemara, I don't understand the need for Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel's comment. My kamash malon. Mechaprin, we already learned in Zvachim Tanina. We saw that just above at the open of our Gemara. Chayavin b'kisui Tanina, that was the Mishnah that we learned at the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. So why do I, and at the top of Pei Zayin Amud Beis, why do I need the line of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel? So says the Gemara, it must be that machshirin itzrichle. We need it for the case of where this particular dam, the kol mare admimus, even though it's a mixture, that if it looks like blood, that it's machshir, that it can transfer tuma. Says the Gemara, machshir nami, idam machshire machshir, imaya achshure machshir. This I don't understand. If you have a mixture of blood and water, mimanav shach, it's going to be mukhshar l'tuma, because water is mayim, that's one of the 7, and dam is blood, that's one of the 7. Mimanav shach is going to be obligated in, it's going to create a scenario of being mukhshar l'tuma. Says the Gemara, lo tzricha shetamdu b'mei geshamim, where the waters got diluted or got combined with rainwater. Says the Gemara, mei geshamim nami. If I pour mei geshamim into this combination, kevan d'shakil v'rami, since I took the rainwater and I poured it in, achshavinhu, I showed that I had interest in that water. That's how you create mukhshar l'tuma, is by making it wet with one of the 7 liquids and doing so with intent. So it says the... But right, others you may not, but right, for the things that fall naturally, right? But here it's rainwater. So if I pour rainwater in, says the Gemara, that can't be the case that was a chiddush case, because if you pour it in, that's achshavinhu. You're obviously interested in that. So lo tzricha, it is still talking about rainwater, but shenis medume alehen. No, the rainwater added into this liquid, but you didn't pour it in. It rained, and it rained in your bucket. Oh, so in that case, we have a chiddush, that if there's rainwater, regular water that you put in, and blood, we will say that that's still considered to be mukhshar l'tuma. Says the Gemara, Rav Asi minahar bil omer b'tzlalta dedama. The same halachos apply to the tzlalta dedama. Today we would call this the serum, a certain part of the blood. I don't know how they were able to separate it or anything along those lines, but that is what's going on over here. The b'tzlalta dedam. Rashi over here on the side, about 10 lines or so from the bottom, says, Dibra masla b'tzlalta dedama, be'osan mayin, in this particular water, shehem min hadam atzmo, kshehu nikrash, when the blood congeals, yesh svivosav tsalul kemayin. There is some type of liquid that is separate of the blood, but from the blood, that's so little kemayim, that's see-through, it's clear. It's a clear liquid. So it says the Gemara that if there's a redness in the serum, that counts as blood. Says the Gemara, 7-8 lines from the bottom of Pei Zayin and Beis. Rav Yirmiyah midifti Amar anush kares. This is regular blood. If you eat it, you're in big trouble. V'hu deika kazayis. As long as you ate a kazayis of it, recognizing that it's a congealed form, and therefore we flip from a revius into a volume of food like a kazayis. V'masnisa tana mitamin be'ohel. This blood is also, if it's from a human being, can be mitame be'ohel, create tumas oel. V'hu deika revius, if there's a revius of that amount of blood. Tanan Hasam. We have a cryptic Mishnah it's actually a brisa, a cryptic brisa that we need to unpack. Says the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom on Pei Zayin Beis. Kol mashke hameis tahorin. All the liquids that exit from a dead person are tahor chutz midamo, with the exception of its blood. Very, very difficult piece of brisa here, which we're going to have to analyze. And the brisa continues, v'chol mare admimus shebo mitamin be'ohel. And the serum of the blood is going to be mitame ba'ohel. Umashke meis tahorin, says the Gemara. Umashke hameis is going to be tahor. How can you say that the mashke of a meis is going to be tahor? After all, uraminhu, we have a brisa. This brisa, as you can see on the side, is found in Maseches Nida, the last of our Maseches. Emir Hashem will get there over the next many months. Mashke tvul yom, if there is a liquid from a tvul yom, that's someone who's gone to the mikvah, and they're basically waiting for Erev Shemesh. So says the Gemara, skip the parentheses, the mashke of a tful yom is kemashkin shenogea bahen, is no different than the liquids that a tful yom would touch. As we turn to the top of Peiches Amud Aleph, and what's unique about the liquids that a tful yom would touch, so says the Gemara, what's unique about it is that ve'elu ve'elu ein metame. That would not be problematic. Why not? Because he's really gone to the mikvah already. We're just waiting for Erev Shemesh. So we're makel by a tful yom. However, says the brisa from Maseches Nida, Ush'ar kol hatmein ben kalin ben chamurin, all other cases of tuma. We spoke about a case, says the Gemara, of a tvul yom. But in any other case of a tvul yom, in any other case of tuma, whether it's kal or chamur, and we'll define this in a minute, we would not say that the mashkin are tahor like we did by the tvul yom. Rather, we would say mashkin ayotze mehen kemashke hanogeh ben ve'elu ve'elu tchila. They're all going to be a rishon l'tuma. They're not going to be tar. They're going to be a rishon l'tuma. Chutz min hamashke shu avatuma, except for the liquid itself, which is going to be an avatuma. So that is not like the brisa that we saw 5 lines from the bottom on Pei Zayin Amud Beis that said kol mashke hameis tahorin. It's not like that at all. Now let's pick apart the brisa from Nida. My kalin my chamurin. What do you mean by a liquid that's kal or by a liquid that's chamur? My lav, Kalin is talking about sheretz v'zav. The chamurin is talking about mace. Kasha on the brisa that we started with that indicate that the mashkin hameis are going to be tahor with the exception of blood. Says the Gemara, lo, what are we talking about? The case of Kalin was sheretz v'chamurin. It was sheretz. It's only talking about sheretz. V'chamurin was talking about a case of zav. But says the Gemara, I don't understand. We're going to be more makbid by a zav than by a mace. Says the Gemara, Maishna zav de gazru bei rabbanon. Why by a zav did we say that all the liquids that exit its body, that's going to be very problematic? Umayshna mace lo gazru bei rabbanon. But why is it that by the mace, let's say there's saliva that exits the mouth of a mace there, you're not going to say that that's problematic? But a mace is a higher level of tumah than a zav. So Zog's the Gemara, beautiful distinction. Zav, when we talk about a person who is a zav, so then, they're not separate from the people. A zav's walking around the community. However, so zav, there the Chachamim instituted that the liquids that exit from their body are problematic. However, mace, if you're dealing with a person that died, they're buried. They're away from the people. They are not amongst the people, and therefore, mace tebedili in shemine lo gazru bei rabbanon. A beautiful distinction that even though a mace has a higher level of tumah, the gzeira de rabbanon, on let's say one of the liquids that exits its body, the zav is more problematic midrabanan because they're around people. I don't have to make a gzeira around a mace. We bury people quickly, and then you don't have to worry about that. That brings us to the 2 dots on Peiches Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Still a little bit of a ways to go. Damanitas v'shal hasakin. We saw that there's a machlokes tanoim in our Gemara that if there was to be blood that is that has splattered or blood that's on the knife, the Tanakama in our Mishnah, which can be seen on the top of Peizayin and Beis said Chayav l'chasos. Rabbi Yehuda says that's only if it's the only blood left. But if there was the blood that initially came out and Kisui Adam was done, then we don't have to do dam on the dam hanisas or the dam sha'al hasakin. Let's see a couple of braises that show us a host of shitas. Tanu Rabbanon v'chisahu. The Tanakama in this brisa says Malamed shadam hanitas v'shal hasakin chayv l'chasos, like the Tanakama of our Mishnah, that if we have splattered blood from the shchita or the blood that's on the knife, that requires kisui adam. Amar Rabbi Yehuda emasai. Rabbi Yehuda says, when is this true? Same Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah, party line, exactly the same. That's only true bisman she'ein sham dam elahu. When do we say that kisui adam is required on splattered blood or when it's on the knife? That's only true and that's the only blood. Aval yesham dam shelohu pater milechasos. But if in fact there is blood other than the blood that's on the knife or the splattered blood, then that blood doesn't need to be have kisui adam at all. So let's just paint a practical scenario. I shech the animal. 95% of the blood drops right below the animal's neck. 2% of the blood is on the knife that were splattered. So says Rabbi Yehuda, you don't need to do kisui adam on the splattered blood, and you don't need to do kisui adam on the blood that's on the knife if you've done kisui adam on the blood that has exited the neck. Next brisa. Tanyidach v'chisahu. What does that mean in this new brisa? Another version of the Tanakama that we saw in the brisa right above and in our Mishnah on the top of Peizayin and Beis. Blood that's splattered, or the blood that's on the agapayim, a very interesting word that's over here. Over here, the reference of agapayim, Rashi, halfway down on the page, agapayim, kosle beis hashchita. That is what we're talking about, the walls of the beis hashchita, very machmir shita, that when we do kisui adam, we're going to need to have the dirt, and we're going to discuss in the next Mishnah what kind of dirt we need, or powder, or clay, whatever, that when we have the dam that's splattered according to the shita, we have to get every piece of blood covered by dirt. Very machmir. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, I disagree. That's only true shelo kisa dama nefesh. That's only true that you have to cover the blood that's on the neck of the animal and the blood that has splattered. That's only true if you didn't cover the primary blood with kisui adam. About kisa dama nefesh, if you covered the blood that exited in order to kill the animal, then pater milachasos. So what the Gemara wants to know, but my kamiflage, we have three shitas. We have the sheet of the Chachamim that we saw 3 times, the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that we saw twice, and the sheet of Rabbi Gamliel that we saw, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that we saw once. Says the Gemara, Rabbanon Sabre Damo means kol damo, no matter what, no matter where. I don't care where it is. Even if you did kisui adam on the initial shchita blood, but there was a splatter, there's some on the knife, you have to do kisui adam. Rabbi Yehuda Sabar Damo ve'afilu mixas damo, that you only need to do some, and once you do some, you don't need to do the rest. He says your obligation is to do the miyuchad shebo. What is the miyuchad blood? That is the dama nefesh, that which exits the body during the actual shchita. And that brings us to the end of this section and up to a new Mishnah on Pei Ches Amud Aleph, halfway down on the page. Good. Let's talk about what we cover blood with. How do we do kisui adam, with what materials, I should say? What do we cover with? What do we not cover with? Mechasin bezevel hadak, finely ground manure. Uvechol hadak, finely ground sand. Besid, with limestone, ground up. Ubecharosis, earthenware. Uvilevena, certain bricks. Uvimegufa, shekashan. A megufa is a barrel or some type of kli or a cover that's also made out of earthenware, but shekashan, that was crushed down. That's what we are allowed to use. What are we not allowed to use? Says the Gemara, Aval, ein mechasen lo bezevel hagas. You're not allowed to use a thicker version of manure. That's not allowed. The lo bechol hagas, not with thicker, more coarse sand. Lo belevena, ovimagufa shelo kashan. You can't use bricks or earthenware covers that are not ground down. V'lo yechafe lo besakli. And kisui adam isn't this balabatish interpretation of what kisui means, which is a cover. Take the cover, put it on top. Absolutely not. You're not yotze. These are all the things that are ein mechasim. Good. Klal Amar Rashbag, what does he say? Davar shemegadel bo tzmachim mechasim bo. If you have something that if you have the type of material in which something grows, a flower pot, whatever the case may be, so then mechasin bo, then when that's ground down into fine parts, you're allowed to use that. And if you're using a material that is not megadol tzmachin, then ein mechasin bo, then you cannot do it. We're going to see some distinctions later on in the Gemara. The Gemara opens, Heichi dami chol hadak. How do we define what is considered to be very, very fine sand? How fine of sand do we need? Today we measure things in microns and in millimeters, very, very, very small measurements. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan, Kol she'ein hayotzer tzarich lekasho. That if you have a yotzer, a potter, someone who works with building pottery, if he says this is fine enough for me to do my work, then that is considered fine enough as it relates to kisui adam. However, if it's thicker, then that's not going to work. If it's thicker, you cannot use that for kisui adam. Some say that this memra, this line that we just saw of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana in the name of Rav Yochanan, was not said on the resha of what is allowed. It was said on the seifa of what isn't allowed. Says the Gemara, some say that Rabbi Bar Bar Chana's comment was on the seifa, that aval ein mechasin lo bezevel hagas velo bechol hagas heichi dami chol hagas. What is considered to be thick sand to the point that you can't use it, coarse sand? Amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan, kol shayotzer tzarich lekasho. The exact opposite definition. If the yotzer, if the potter needs to grind it down more in the mill, then we know that it's not thin enough. Between the two. Let's say that we have a little bit of a clod of earth that is a little bit too thick, and you can break it by hand. So according to the Tanakama, according to version 1 of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana Rav Yochanan, you could break it with your hand, no problem. According to the second version, it's not eligible. That brings us to the 2 dots, about 5 lines from the bottom on Peches Amud Aleph. Let's continue a few more minutes of learning. Tanu Rabbanon. V'chisahu, yachal yichasenu ba'avanim o yechafe alav esakli. Maybe you can just cover it with stones, or maybe you can just invert a kli on top of it and you fulfill the mitzvah of kisui adam. Absolutely not. Talmud Lomar be'afar. It has to be in afar. It has to be in dirt. Let's translate this. How do I know that it's not only afar and that really there's more going on? There's more things included in the materials I can use for kisui adam, such as, says the Gemara, minayin l'rabos zevel hadak. Ground up manure, v'chol hadak, ground up sand, ushchikas avanim, ground up rocks, ushchikas charasis, and ground up pottery, unaores pishtandaka, very fine parts of flax. Turning to the top of Peches Amud Beis, unasores shell charashin, sawdust. Sawdust, that's what Rashi explains over here at the top of the page, and that's allowed to be used. Daka, as long as it's fine. Visid v'charasis levana umegufa shekashan, and using limestone or pottery or bricks or earthenware covers that were ground up. How do we know that all of those are in fact allowed in the affirmative? Says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar v'chisahu. If that's true that you're allowing those from the word v'chisahu, top of Peches Amud Beis, second line. Yochol shani mar be'av zevel hagas v'chol hagas v'shchikas kli matachos uleveino megufa shelo kishan v'kemach v'subin umorsan. Maybe I should also allow thicker granules, more coarse versions of zevel, more coarse sand. If I have metals that are ground up, or if I have these bricks that are not cut up so finely, or if I have fine bran or not so fine bran, coarse bran, maybe all of these should be allowed by kisui adam. Talmud Lomar no be'afar. So we see v'chisau is one word and be'afar is another. These 2 words are playing off of each other, as we'll soon see. How did you know where to draw the line? How did you know what to include and what not to include? It seems somewhat arbitrary. So says the Gemara, it's very simple. Achar sheriba akasuv umiet. Once the kasuv, the pasuk was inclusive and also limiting. We have a chisau, means that you can cover seemingly with anything. Then you have afar, which is very limiting. So says the Gemara, because of that, because I have a word that's inclusive, chisau, and a word that's limiting, which is be'afar, mar be'ani es elu shein min afar. I take things that have a similarity to afar. Umotzi ani es elu shein min afar. Says the Gemara, maybe you should learn those 2 words differently. You seem to be doing this relatively loose definition of that which is included in that which is not. Says the Gemara, Ema, maybe I should say v'chisahu is a klal, and the word afar is a prat, and therefore klalu prat, ein b'chlal elamasha b'prat, afar in mid yachrin lo. Maybe it should only be earth. Forget everything else that the Mishnah listed as an option. Perhaps we should exclude everything else because we have a klalu prat. Says the Gemara, a beautiful idea I don't believe we've ever seen before. Let's see. Yeah, it's only in the future in Bechoros. Says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down on Peches and Beis. This is not a regular klalu prat because of the following. Amar of Mari, mishum to have a klal hatzarich leprat. The klal needed the prat. The word v'chisahu was so exceedingly broad that without the word be'afar, we wouldn't have had any clarity at all. And v'chol klal hatzarich leprat ain't done in oso b'chlalu prat. Very, very, very unique halacha. Good. We're not going to focus in on this now. We'll do this in Bechoros. Let's learn about 7 or 8 more lines, and then we'll call it a night. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda. Ein mechasin ela b'davar shezorin bo umatzmiach. The only type of material that we're allowed to use for kisui adam is the type of material in which something could grow. Now, obviously, you can't take the whole pot and invert it. It has to be ground up. But the raw material from which that pot was made has to be something that something else could grow in. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, hi, burcha. This is considered to be a burcha. A burcha is not a good language. Hi, burcha is 7, 8, 9, 10 lines from the bottom of the page in Rashi. Hi, burcha, eino ikr. It's not correct. Lashon bur, from the language of being a bur, from being someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. Interesting language of burcha. One that we've seen already, Maseches Shavuos. Says the Gemara, Amar le Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Rava, my burcha say. What's the problem? Ana amrisi ne'alei. I actually have a proof for you, and I'll show it to you what it is right now that we are allowed to do this. A person's traveling. Lo lachasos. You don't have any, this says afer, it should be afar, because that's what we've been talking about, with an ayin, and you have nothing to cover it with. What do? Shochek dinare zavu mechasa. You can grind up a gold coin and use that for kisui adam. You're on a boat and you have no dirt with you because boats don't usually have dirt. Sorif talisu machasa, you can use your talis, burn it up, take the ash, and you can use that for kisui adam. So says the Gemara, oh, what kind of source is that? Bishlama sorif talisu machasa ashkachan efer dikri afar. I could find a way to say that ash is like dust, efer is like afar, no problem. But eladinar zav minalan, mehecha tesi that you can use gold. Says the Gemara, Amar Bzeira, Va'afaro Zahavlo. No, we are allowed to use gold. You're right, it's not exactly the same svara. It's based on a pasuk that we included, because Va'afaros Zahav, we see that the word afar and zav are in the same pasuk, so we include it. But that is the conclusion of this Gemara. We're going to stop right here at Tanu Rabbanon. Mir Tashem will pick up tomorrow night right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.